Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the supportive housing session here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. To lead us off will be, which one are you going to start? Okay. So I'm just going to pass the mic over, and you can decide who goes first.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for sticking it out in the after lunch session. This is probably the nap time. So try to keep you folks awake. Maybe we'll just start with some introductions first, and then I lost the junk in a poll. I was actually voluntold to go first. But I'll introduce myself. I'll pass it over to Sharon, and then just got a few slides, mostly pictures, wanted to share with you folks, but try to reserve time for a talk story. My name is James Koshiba. I'm the governor's coordinator on homelessness. I've had this job since January of this year. It's my first time in government. For the 20 years prior to that, I worked entirely in the nonprofit and community space on a variety of issues, environmental sustainability, community development, and then since 2015, really started to focus on houselessness and solutions to houselessness. And my learning journey for the last 8 years has really been about spending time with people on the street and building community of folks on the street and trying to see our systems from the perspective of the folks who our systems are supposed to serve. So that's most of what I brought into the job. Yeah. But mahalo you guys for having us, and I'll turn it over to Sharon for an introduction.
Mahalo. So Sharon Hirota, I work for the County of Hawaii with the Office of Housing and Community Development, and I manage the newly formed Community Engagement Division. And we service the entire island, although we are based out of Hilo, but we do come to Kona often. So just to give you some background, I came from the private sector many years ago and then joined government. Similar to James, got an eye awakening experience as to what working for the government means. But I think I've adopted well over the years. I managed the Section 8 rental assistance program for many years. And as a manager of that program, there was a daunting, at that time, wait list of over 10,000 people on the wait list, waiting over 7 years for housing assistance. And as a manager, I just saw that just so disheartening as to people when they apply, they needed housing now, not 7 years from then. And so really looked at it from a different perspective as to how can we engage with our nonprofits in the community in partnership with the government to find solutions for these individuals so we could reduce this list and really be more efficient in the way we process. And so part of my approach and my continued approach is really working alongside our nonprofit organization and different agencies within the government to look at opportunities as to how we can connect people to resources and opportunities that will enable them to no longer need government assistance. And that has been my work in the community along with my team and along with many of you that are in this room. So mahalo to all of you for coming along with the ride with me over the years and continuing to look for solutions, because as much as we house one person today or tomorrow, there's 20 or 30 more on the streets that we need to work towards finding solutions for them. So thank you for having me here today.
So you can see that I've known Sharon for many years from before I started in this job, when I was on the nonprofit side and she was on the government side, and just want to shout her out a little bit because she brings a lot of heart to the work and to the job. And you can see that we go rogue sometimes, we push the podium back and we just made house over here and set up our own designs. So we might go a little off topic. I know that the title of this is Permanent Supportive Housing, and we are going to talk about things that are connected to supportive housing, including some of the resources and tools that government has available to support. But where I really wanted to start was, I'll share a little bit. Maybe I can pull up the slides. I promise you, this is the most boring slide in the deck, and it'll get more interesting after this. But I want to start just by sharing some context. I give a little bit of my personal context. But I'll start just by saying that, in my 7 months on the job, so I didn't know Governor Green well before I started in this position. And so the first month I really spent with him trying to define priorities. And I knew from, 8 years doing community building and folks on the street and paying attention to these issues that homelessness is the kind of issue where everybody has an opinion. A lot of it is negative and complaining. And if you're not careful, those kinds of opinions will drive reactions and solutions and policies. So I thought it was really important to set some priorities at the beginning to get us focused on what were real solutions, even if they were some of the hard things to do, so that as that noise was happening, we'd be able to say, hey, we set these priorities, and we're going to stick with them. So in brief, we set 5 priorities, okay? The first 3 of those 5 priorities are all about creating space for our people to be housed and healed, okay? I'll talk about the last 2 separately, but the reason why 3 out of the 5 priorities are focused on that is because we know that's ultimately the solution to houselessness, right? And the root cause, it's because we live in one of the most competitive places for space in the world. And for people that are on the bottom of the income scale, for anybody that has faced challenges in their lives, no more space for our people, right? So unless and until we're willing to make that space, create it, and design it in a way that fosters healing, growth, and true affordability for folks so that they can sustain it over time, we're never going to end homelessness. So that's why the first 3 of the 5 priorities are focused on that space. First priority is we got some kind of traditional tools for creating affordable housing. We got to get those focused, at least a sliver of those resources focused on people who need it the most. When we call housing affordable, most of the time it's not within reach of our people that really need it. I know, from experience that people coming off the street, the most they can afford, or coming out of an institutional setting too, the most you can afford is maybe $300, $400, $500 a month, right? And if the rent is above that, you're not gonna be able to sustain it for long, right? Exactly. So that's the goal, is to take some of our existing affordable housing tools and resources, get it focused on our folks that fit that criteria. The second priority is to experiment with some new ways, some alternative ways to create these places of housing and healing. And that's really what I want to focus on today, is this kauhale concept, a village concept, for housing and healing people in a sustainably affordable way. I'll come back to that. Third priority is we need space for people with serious mental and behavioral health needs. We need everything from inpatient hospital beds to community-based spaces like group homes and recovery homes, and we don't have enough of any of it, right? And so those are the first 3 priorities on the space. The fourth priority is we need to reform our systems. So right now, we have a system in place, just like all the other systems we've been talking about, right? We've been talking about how our systems need to be hulid. Our systems need to be changed and reformed, become more people-centered, become more relationship-centered. Right now, the system we have to get people from street to home, street outreach, case management, emergency shelter, transitional, it doesn't operate that way. And there's plenty of hurdles. For those of you who are familiar with that system, there's plenty of hurdles and bottlenecks on that journey from street. Even if you determine to get home, to get from street to home can take months or years. I mean, Sharon is talking about the work she was doing to try to shorten that path, to make vouchers available. We got too many bottlenecks and obstacles. So we got to clear away all that and make it a straight shot to get people home. We need the space first, because right now, no more space. That's why people are staying on those lists for months or years. But if we can get the space, then we got to clear away that pathway and get people home. And the fifth and final priority is to call everybody away from the not in my backyard, stereotypes, stigmas, ignorance, and back to community and aloha, and all the way to yes in my backyard. And the message there is, okay, look, you don't want the homeless encampment in the park down on your street, or you don't want people sleeping in front of your business. So you're willing to show up at community meetings to complain about that. But also when we propose the recovery home or the affordable housing targeted folks at the bottom of the income scale, you also don't want that. We can't have it both ways, okay? Every community has to take some kuleana for housing our people. And they are our people out on the street, right? And so every neighborhood has to get to away from, not in my backyard, but at least where in my backyard? Where in our community is there space for people, right? So those are the five priorities. I wanted to spend some time sharing because it was really, I wasn't going to actually share slides today, but I was listening to everybody talking this morning and then watching the work you guys did, and I was like, okay, this is a group that can go deep. And so I want to share a little bit about the Kauhale effort, but really to share the story of where it comes from and what the inspiration is. So Kauhale, as many of you know, loosely translated is village. And my eyes are so bad, I can't even read what I wrote up there. But I will tell you that the general idea is to create village settings for people to be housed and healed. And not as a transitional space, but it's a space for as long as you need it. When I say truly affordable, we're trying to get those rents down to $500 a month or less, or a third of your income, whatever you can afford. And the key difference between this and other kinds of housing solutions, although I think it does fit under the umbrella of permanent supportive housing, is when we talk about the supportive in supportive housing, a lot of that support comes from community. Both community within the space, so people taking care of the place and taking care of each other, and from the wider community. So you want that built into each of these village spaces, okay? I'll come back to that in a few minutes. But I really, rather than showing you those words and talking to you about this, the best way to explain the Kauhale concept is to explain where it came from, okay? So I mentioned that for 8 years before I took this job, I was building relationships with folks on the street. I did it primarily on Oahu, with encampments on Oahu. One of the encampments I got really close to during that time was Pu'uhonua o Waianae. For those of you that are not familiar with Pu'uhonua o Waianae, it's an encampment of 250 people who live unhoused at the Waianae Boat Harbor. Everybody's in tents. You know them. Led by a really remarkable woman, Twinkle Borge, who became a close friend of mine over the years. I was out there, before I took this job, I was out there 3 times a week. I played a variety of roles in the village, and I did that because I was just learning from them. Every day, every week, there'd be something new I was learning about real home and real healing for people. So I want to share more about the village because I think that's a better way to explain the concept of Kauhale. So these are some of the village residents. I mentioned, just as an overview, 250 people living in tents at the Waianae Boat Harbor. The village is a remarkable community. Despite the fact that there are no more houses, it is a model community. And things I learned from this village, I tried to apply in my own neighborhood and my own life. So one of the things about this village is they're highly organized. That picture on the bottom center of folks in red are some of the village leaders. The 250 residences are divided into sections, so about 25 residents per section. Each section has a captain appointed by Twinkle. The captain is responsible for taking care of people in their section and also making sure that the basic rules of the village are followed. The responsibility for captain rotates every 6 to 12 months, and that's intentional. I'll get to that too in a second, but you can see from some of these pictures the activities of the village. They have tried over the years many different ways to grow their own food. They have a donation center because they get a lot of donations. They're very respected by the wider communities. They get a lot of donations. They've organized it into a donation tent, which really looks like a Ross's if you walk in there. It's like there's clothes on racks. There's a section for shoes, shoes. There's a section for toys. But it's pretty amazing, and that's staffed by residents from the village. They're open from like 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Anybody can come in and take what you need. Even if you have a house, if you're from the neighborhood next door, you need something, you can come in and take whatever you need. But that gives you a flavor of what the spirit of the village is like and how they're organized. One of Twinkle's mantras and kind of the foundational spirit of the village is Kuleana wakes up mana. Responsibility wakes up the spirit. So that organization is not just about maintaining order in the village, it's really about identifying a person's gift and then having a role in the village so that person can contribute to their community, right? So I mentioned like the donation center, the garden, people have those, are given that kuleana to take care of those spaces, but they do a lot more than that too. It's not just responsibilities in the village. They've also organized themselves to take kuleana for the wider community. So these are images of their outreach team, the street outreach team. I mentioned they get a lot of donations. They have a team of 12 people that goes out to houseless encampments up and down the Waianae Coast, and they distribute the donations that they get to other houseless folks and help connect them with service providers that they trust. Okay. Well, I won't go backwards, but before I get to this slide, another example of that Kuleana Wakes Up Mana, the village also has a security team, which is like a neighborhood watch on steroids. Okay, so about 30 of their residents come out every night and patrol the whole village area, so the boat harbor and the surrounding area, from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. every night. They have walkie-talkies, they have vests. But again, talk about a model community, right? That's one of the things I was thinking. I wish I had that in my neighborhood. I live in a walk-up with 20 units in it, and maybe people look out for each other, hopefully, but to have something like this would be awesome, right? Yeah, they'll stop you on the way in, right? In a nice way, be like, hey, how's it? Yeah, who are you coming to see? There are signs in every section that have the rules up. There's little gatherings, the bulletin board. It's like I said, a remarkable community. In 2018, they were going to be evicted by the state. The state said they had plans for that land, so they announced that they were going to sweep the entire village. The village leadership and housed allies like myself and others kind of rallied to defend the village against the eviction, and eventually Governor Ige intervened, called off the sweep, and he promised the village 2 things. He said, you guys cannot stay here forever because the state has plans for this land, but I will give you time to manage your own transition, but you need to start looking for someplace else to be. To be. And second, as he said, I will cover you under, at that time, he had an emergency proclamation on homelessness so that you guys can build quickly and in whatever way you need to for your people. So immediately after this, the village set to work. I think I'm skipping over slides here, but fundraising, looking for land and fundraising. They had events, they made presentations. Yeah, I think there's some slides missing from this that got left out, but it's okay. It's good. It'll speed me along, which is probably a good thing. Bottom line is it took about 18 months, but they raised $1.5 million and they bought 20 acres of land 5 minutes away from the Waianae Boat Harbor through their nonprofit. And right now what's happening is they're in the middle of construction on the permanent home for their entire village, all 250 people. So they're going to move from Makai to Puhonua Mauka, and that move will start, knock on wood, before the end of this calendar year. They did face, I mentioned NIMBYism before, they did face NIMBYism, despite the fact that they got all these strengths and a lot of beautiful things happening there. They did face not in my backyard opposition, so I was part of the team that was helping fundraise and identify land and all this, and when we found a piece of land that the village wanted to buy, we said, rather than the neighbors hearing about it in the news or something, we're going to go door to door and talk to every resident in that neighborhood and tell them, hey, we're going to put in an offer on this land. We might be neighbors soon. Let's get to know each other. So a team, again, of about 30 village residents and a couple of volunteers like me went door to door, talked to everybody. 90% of people were supportive. There were a handful of people in that neighborhood who were like, oh, hell no, I don't want no houseless village moving up near me. Even though we showed them the plans, it was not going to be a tent city, it was going to be homes. And you'll see the master plan in a second. But there were just people that were dead set against it. And so I don't know if you can make that out, but someone put a sign up on Waianae Valley Road that said, stop Twinkle, no shanty town, this will destroy our community. They came down in an angry mob to the Waianae Boat Harbor, actually, to kind of protest. That was quite a gut punch to folks in the village, but another of Twinkle's mantras and the village mantra is, you build community first. Her saying is community first, and that starts a relationship. So we bought the land. She moved about 20 people up to the new property, including a family with kids. And every time the village village has a lot of events for the kids of their village. There's about 35 kids that live in their village. So she does a summer program, Easter egg hunt, holiday events. Every time she had one of those, she would invite kids from the neighborhood next door, the house neighborhood, to come and join their events. The kids made friends, the parents made friends, all that NIMBYism died down, and now they're in the middle of construction, and we might get a complaint here and there about dust, but all that, voracious opposition to folks being there, it's disappeared. But there's a lesson in that too, right? About how we get past the stigma, the stereotypes, right? All that ignorance really does come down to just building some connection and relationship, right? Exactly. Oh, that's a picture of the land. That's the master plan. You can see about half of the property is going to be dedicated to agriculture because, as I said, the village has long aspired to grow its own food. So they dedicated half the property to farming. There's folks in the village that have interest and some skill in doing that. The design, the only thing I'd say about the design is, sticking with that concept of Kuleana wakes up mana, the village really were the ones who came up with the design, okay? And they came up with stuff that architects trying to design affordable housing for 250 people would not have come up with. So they said, we want the homes organized this way because we're used to living in sections already. So you'll see there's enough homes for about 25 people in each section. So they're gonna take their same organization and leadership structure, move it up here with their captains. There's a lot of communal space here, right? There's one gathering hall, there's shared bathrooms, laundry, kitchen and eating spaces. The farm obviously is communal space. But those spaces they said those spaces are important because if we're gonna have community and sustain that feeling of community, we actually need to have physical space that we take care of together, right? And also space for gathering together, which a lot of our communities don't have. But they were like, we gotta build that in here because that's so important to us. I mentioned that construction's already started, so this is not something that's just being constructed for people, it's being constructed by people. So there is a team of about 20 folks from the village that completed a general construction certification. That's them building some of the first homes. And the first home completed there. That's Twinkle in the maroon shirt and part of her construction team that contributed to the building of that first home. But again, sticking with, at every step, trying to stick with that idea of Kuleana wakes up mana, right? This is the farm half of the village. There's a nursery. They have about 100 ulu trees. There's probably by now 30 of them in the ground. There's papaya, sweet potato, other food crops that make sense for their land and their climate. But again, the village wants to grow as much of its own food as possible, so this is happening now in that space. But really, that is the inspiration behind this kauhale concept, okay? And so one of the things that I realized as part of my job shortly after I started work was I had to go and interact with the legislature, our representatives and senators, and try to explain and work with them on getting resources for these priorities, right? And the kauhale concept had been proposed in the past, but this year, for the first time, we owe them a lot because they put resources behind the idea. So there is now an appropriation for this year and for next year to support this village-style housing, okay? One of my other jobs is to work with community organizations, county governments, and other state government agencies to find space for these things to happen, right? So we have money now. We need land. We need physical space, whether it's like vacant land or a building that we can repurpose. One of the things about kauhale is it doesn't have to be tiny homes, a tiny home village with shared bathroom and kitchen. It could be in a repurposed apartment building, it could be a dormitory space, it could be an office building. The important thing is that there has to be some space that people take care of together. There has to be room for people to gather and build that sense of community. And from the get-go, it has to be whatever kind of programming there is there has to be created with the intention that, look, our job as house supporters is to help people build that sense of community and take more and more kuleana over time so that this is not a service provider-led project. This is their community. And they are going to have kuleana for taking care of the space and of each other over time. And we are going to work ourselves out of a job as service providers, right? So that really is the concept. I mentioned there's resources now. I can talk more about those resources during the Q&A. But the example of Puhonoa Waianae, and if they're not the only ones. There's a few other examples of village spaces, right, Waimanalo, out there that really informed this concept and this style of supportive housing. The last thing I'll say about the Kauhale initiative is that the other important thing is that I believe, and what we're trying to demonstrate is that really community is the key to healing, to purpose, and to long-term affordability, okay? I think we know it's key to healing and purpose because to bring someone home is about so much more than just putting a roof over someone's head. You gotta have that sense of belonging. You gotta feel like you have something valuable to offer your community. That's so much of what healing and growth is about for any of us, right? And so these spaces, we want to intentionally design them for that, both physically and again, the role of service providers and the wider community. We want that to all be part of the intentional setup of these village spaces. But we also want to demonstrate that that's how you keep a place affordable. Because a lot of times you set up a shelter, transitional housing, group home, whatever. Sometimes the biggest expense items are for paying for things like 24/7 security or a higher repair and maintenance cost, right? If units get busted up. But if we build that sense of ownership and community and kuleana, a place like the village, like Puhonoa Waianae, they're never gonna pay for security, right? They already do it themselves where they're at. When they move home, they're not gonna be paying for that. Then those expenses don't need to be passed on to people in the form of higher and higher rents. That's how we keep the space truly affordable for the long run. So that's really what we're trying to demonstrate with these Kauhale villages. Yeah. One of the things that inspires me about Puhonoa Waianae is that their work inspires other people. So these are images of other encampments on Oahu that learned about Puhonoa Waianae, that went to visit the village and had started working in their encampments to kind of follow the same path. So they started taking care of their parks. They started starting weekly service projects. They started building a relationship with their house neighbors to start this dialogue about where is there space in our community for a village of our own. And so these are some of the folks that still work with and still working toward creating villages for these folks. But this dispels this whole idea that people are service resistant or they don't want help. A lot of times it's that a good friend of mine who's been houseless himself on the continent said, it's not that people are service resistant, it's that a lot of our services are people resistant, And so, when we listen to folks and we engage folks and we talk to them about, okay, what kind of solution what would you want to see? What would you want to be a part of? Then the solutions, emerge that folks are invested in from the beginning, right? Last example I'll give is at Governor's initiative, really, and really this was his idea. We set up a medical respite kauhale, literally a 90-second walk from his house, and right between his house and Queen's Hospital. And he said, I want it here because I want to be able to go out to any community and say, look, if I can put something in my backyard, then you got to put something in your backyard too, right? He wanted to be out there championing that message of YIMBY, not YIMBY. And of course, we know, just like many of our institutional settings, whether it's a carceral institutional setting or a hospital, people are discharged right out to the street, right, with nothing. And so That was the purpose of this space. I'll be honest, I was very nervous about this because we were given a very short timetable to stand it up, 8 weeks to create it, 10 units for people being discharged from hospital to the street. And I was more nervous about how it would operate because to call it a medical respite kauhale meant something to me and meant something to Gov. It means we wanted it to operate like a village. And to set something up on that timetable and have it function like a village, I knew would be really difficult. Thankfully, we found a great partner in Project Vision Hawaii. They were here. They might be in another. There's a couple of folks here from Project Vision. Want to shout out you guys because they took a big risk in helping us get it set up. And we said from the outset, we don't want this to be a typical shelter or respite program. We want it to function like a village. That means part of your job is to help people build connection with each other, and to the extent that they're physically able, to take some kuleana for taking care of the space and of each other. And I'll tell you that there's been a lot of challenges, but to me, the main success of the place, and it's not something that's owed to me or government at all, is how quickly, this place has only been up for 2.5 months, and the 10 patients that are there quickly formed community with each other. So there's one patient in the place that now takes all the other patients to their doctor's appointments. There's a woman in there that started chemotherapy a month and a half ago. She has to go to chemo almost every day. He takes her daily to her appointments. They didn't know each other before, okay? There's another woman that takes care of all the plants in the medical respite kauhale. She's watering them every day. Another person who is disinfecting all the surfaces in there, okay? And so what that says to me is, like a lot of times when I talk about Puhonoa Waina, they say, well, but there's only one twinkle, this is a one-off. What that says to me is people are hungry for community. And I know this for myself, like, it's so easy for us to be isolated, to be disconnected from each other. We're hungry for community, we're hungry for that connection, and we're hungry to make a different kind of contribution. I mean, having a job is making one kind of contribution, but to do something in your community for people that you're close to and you care about, that's something different, And so I've been amazed at how community has formed in this space and how it's contributed to people's physical, mental, and spiritual healing in this space. So I'm happy to answer questions about the Kauhale initiative because, as I said, there's now resources available for it. I'm looking for partners in the community to help make these places happen. This is not something that government is going to come to a neighborhood and say, we're going to put a Kauhale here. It's really going to take a community partner or partners in every neighborhood to say, we want this here and we want to be part of creating it. And I'm looking for connections to folks who are living houselessness right now to also be part of every kauhale, So that was a lot to throw at you. Appreciate your attention and your patience, and happy to answer any questions afterwards. Mahalo.
Thank you. I always enjoy listening to James and his perspective about what he brings to the work that we do here. So thank you for sharing. So I work for the county Office of Housing, and like James said, the title of this breakout group is Permanent Supportive Housing, and I'm gonna take like you said, we go rogue, so we're going to take a different approach. So I want to share with you different things that the county government, at least out of our office, is working on. So the first one, a lot of it has to do with education, awareness, and advocacy. And a lot of you out there continue to, support and advocate for those that don't have voices, and I appreciate all of that. What I do want to tell you is about some of the funding resources that are here locally. Most of them are rather new. Most of the work that we do to address the needs of our most vulnerable population came from federal and state grants. And in 2002, we're fortunate that our county council then introduced and Mayor signed into law an allocation of funding to support our work. So the first one I want to talk about, and while we are talking about reintegration housing, I wanted to share that in early August, the county released the second round of its homelessness and housing fund, putting out a call for different organizations to come up and bring forward their creative ideas on how to address homelessness and housing on Hawaii Island. This is county funds, so a little bit more, lot more flexible than federal and state funds. But we're looking to build capacity here on our island because it takes all of us addressing. It doesn't take one or two organizations, but it takes all of us doing a little bit of our work together to address the needs of those in our community. Everything is online this year, so we're accepting applications online. Applications are due September 7th by 4 o'clock. I have that memorized. So if you're interested, I highly recommend you just Google Office of Housing, County of Hawaii, go to the grants page, and you'll get all of the information there. We're looking to contract out a little over $10 million in grant funds for the period starting January 1st, 2024, by the time we're done with the contracting. So I encourage you and your organizations, or if you're not in the position to apply directly, encourage your leaders to do the same, to apply. At the same time, the county is in its process of updating its action plan. So this is under the requirements for federal funds, community development block grant, HOME, or home funds, and housing trust funds. Those applications will be released in early September and have a deadline of mid-November. Again, look at the opportunity for the use of federal funds to address housing and homelessness, especially for those that we're trying to help. Again, these are different buckets, and there are other fundings that are available, but a lot of times you need multiple sources of funding in order for something to happen. Lastly, I just wanted to share that we just recently closed. The county also had funding awarded under its what do we call the Housing Production Fund, and that application period closed in July. They received over 30 applications for funding, and they're about to award, hopefully before the end of the calendar year. And they're looking to award a little over $18 million to just housing here on Hawaii Island. So again, lots of money in the community, and it takes all of us working together to find solutions. In addition to all of that, we just released on Monday a request for a proposal. We're starting up our Emergency Rent Assistance Program, or ERAP. Many of you are very familiar that in times of COVID, the federal government stepped in and offered rent relief for those impacted by the COVID pandemic. The county was very fortunate that we got a third round of funding, and so we're coming out with funding. This time, the federal government really modify the rules that those eligible do not need to be COVID related, but those that are just struggling to pay rent on Hawaii Island and have fallen behind. So that request was released earlier this week. We're hoping to have a contractor on by mid-October. And then finally, coming out tomorrow, is another request for a proposal. We talked about, I think in different aspects this morning, was shared about having the support services for individuals in our community in navigating the different services and resources. Unless, I think we heard this morning that unless you're familiar with what's in the community and those resources, sometimes it takes 10 phone calls before you can get to the path of home. And so the county is taking that to heart and was able to secure funding to pilot what we're calling a community navigator program. And really looking for someone out there to help us secure individuals working and living within their community, who are leaders within their community to help the people that they live and work amongst and guide them through connecting them to resources and services. Because a lot of times we have people in the community who are suffering, and a lot of times what we hear is, there's other people worse off than me, so I'm not going to apply, or I shame apply, or I'm not going to qualify without even reading the rules. They disqualify themselves. And so hopefully if we can educate people within the community who can handhold their neighbors, their friends, to the different resources, then we'll reduce the barriers and people will get access to services and resources. So just some of the things that the county is doing island-wide and working alongside everyone to address the needs. The other thing I wanted to share was, there's a lot of times we talk about the shortage in housing or the high price of housing. I think this morning there was a 5,600 and somebody said that was the rent. And in Kona, that might be a true statement. So just want to kind of share with you some of the projects that are coming, that are under construction currently on Hawaii Island. So if you live in Kona or you're familiar with Kona, the Kukuiola Emergency Shelter and Assessment Center is finally, after 4 years, coming to fruition. If you live in Hilo and you take a detour up Kealakehe Parkway, you can see it on the right-hand side. At first phase will be 60 emergency hales, along with an assessment center, community center, shared restroom and community kitchen. A lot of green space, again, to build community within there. At full build-out, we'll add 48 supportive permanent housing with supports. There will be more on long-term. And our goal, again, is to align with the governor's priorities in terms of really trying to create a space of community. So really working hard to develop with input from the community as to what this should look like. That will sit on a little over 6 acres. The county was also able to secure, adjacent to that, an additional 11 acres that over the next few years will continue to look at opportunities to build additional housing there on that site. Kaloko Heights, if you're familiar with Hinalani, or if you came from Hilo and drove down Hinalani to get here, you'll see the construction that is happening on the north side of the road. So Hawaii Island Community Development is building 100 affordable housing units for families. They've quickly did some mass grading and is starting the vertical construction of their first fourplex, as you explained to me yesterday. So that's exciting for West Hawaii. Hale na Koa o Hanakai is in Hilo. It's a 92 one-bedroom unit right across, or maybe I should say diagonally across, Waikea High School. If you live in that area, you'll see the construction is full steam ahead, and they're hoping to have that project and ready for occupancy early next year. Then we have Kaiulu o Kapiolani, another 64-unit project that will be located across of the police department in Hilo. So we're excited about that project. And then we have 2 self-help projects happening in Ainaloa. So while housing, we're always short in number of houses, I can tell you that this administration, alongside Mayor Kim and our Susan Kunz, who's our housing administrator, has been really working hard to get these housing moving forward. And a lot of it has to do with housing for all, not for a particular category, but how can we live as a community and integrate everyone into the same community. And it's not like that's for them and this is for us and that's for them, but how do we live amongst each other? And then we have another 6 projects throughout the islands that will start construction in early 2024. That is a total of a little over 900 total affordable housing units. So very exciting that we're starting to see movement in the field of construction. As I was talking to James earlier today, and I was listening throughout the day, I think something that really resonates with me is while we talk about, while we share with you, at least from my perspective, all of these housing projects, all of the vouchers that have become available, and all of this funding that is available to support our families here on Hawaii Island. And when we look at those, when we look at individuals that are exiting out of incarceration, and how do we ensure that they 2 years or 5 months later, due to no fault of their own, they're getting caught up back into the system, and end up in a place that they shouldn't be. And for me, it's all about how do we ensure that those individuals that are exiting incarceration are ready for housing, right? So how do we ensure that as they prepare themselves, as they work within the system to prepare themselves for exit, how do we know, what do we need to do to prepare them for the exit? Right? Because a lot of them, if they're not connected or don't have the social capital when they exit, in most cases, just struggle. We struggle as individuals who may be employed to find housing. Imagine someone exiting with nothing and then having to compete with somebody who has half of what they have. And I guess that's the work that I am passionate about, because I think everybody deserves a chance. And so what are we doing to ensure that these individuals have a chance, right? How do we connect them to resources prior to their exit? How do we ensure that somebody is working with them or working through the process of even pulling their credit report before somebody may have stolen their identification. They may be back on taxes, and the minute they come out, they're just inundated with multiple barriers. And so that's the work that part of our division is doing. Part of the other hat I wear is addressing those that are unsheltered, not necessarily connected to the judicial system. But more importantly, how do I ensure that they don't enter into homelessness? Because then I gotta wear another hat and have a conversation about that. So I challenge all of you to join me and everyone else working in this field, that housing doesn't all look the same for every one of us, right? Housing is not, and what's affordable to me or to James or to you may not be affordable to the next person sitting next to us. So I can go on and on, because it's my passion. But I just challenge all of you to work alongside of us, find and help us work together as a team to find solutions. And for all of you that do the hard work on the ground day in, day out, mahalo to all of you, because certainly could not do this. What I do is rewarding because of you, because of what each of you do. So, I turn on my Zoom camera, I get 20 of you, and now I want to hug you. And I just, from deep down, I just want to say mahalo, because I truly, truly do appreciate it. And you tell you appreciate me, I appreciate you even more. But I do really appreciate all the work you do. Before I give the mic back to James or answer any of your questions, because I think we're done for the formal part of it, I do want to recognize my team. They're here. So Amy Kaavaloa joined our team literally less than a week ago. And then Courtney here also joined our team earlier this year, and they're both sitting with their eyes open going, oh my God, she's gonna call us up, but I'm not. And then Keiko Mercado, who's been part of our team since last year, exited because she was afraid I was gonna make her an exhibit. So she said, I'm going. But again, mahalo. Thank you to them for being along for the ride. Appreciate you guys. Questions for James?
Out, so parole didn't help me or anything, but when my wife was released, she's on parole currently now, and after 6 months, usually with look for your own place and they'll allow you to move. So when I looked for a place for us to move, I looked for something within our budget. It wasn't about where we wanted to live, it's about where we could afford to live. But then Patrolling Authority shut it down. It's got bad reviews, or it's in a high-risk area. But that's the areas we can afford to live in. Right? It's not about where we want to live, that's where we can afford to live. But because you say no, now we have to hunt elsewhere. You know what I mean? And it's just outside of our budget. So what do we do then? Right? So I asked today when he came, I approached Corey, I know he's part of the Patrolling Authority, and asked him, so what do you expect me to do? Because I only make so much money. And I cannot afford to live outside of those areas, so what do I do then? You know what I mean? And so he tells me to question someone else. And I know Tony. So I tell Tony, and Tony looks at me, and I just love her. She's always passionate, you know, she's like, we're gonna work on that because there's nothing they can really say because it's outside of our budget. You know what I mean? So that is a common thing in women's prison, is we get denied parole because we have nowhere to go home to. And we have to have a place to be released to. And they only pay for 2 houses. There's only 2 houses and there's only space for 6 women. We got 15 up for parole. Everybody's not going home. And it's because we have nowhere to go.
I don't know if everybody could hear that. Could folks hear? Yeah? Okay.
But that's with Beyond, so I work with Beyond Bars, and that's one of our goals, is to try and find a place for them to come out to. At the same time, we have our food trucks for getting them somewhere to work until they find something they really want. Or like I do landscaping on the side. They can come and work with me until they find something they really want to do. But just so they come out to something rather than nothing, because I mean that's hard to jumpstart from nothing. It's not easy, you know? And I did it for a whole year. I relapsed in that time, and it wasn't for the fact I go to school on top of holding a full-time job, and I still try to help other people, and I need help myself. So it's a struggle, you know. Coming out to nothing, it's a struggle. And I'm friends with lots of homeless people, so I'm used to that life. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, I don't need your help sitting here. I can go plant myself over here, and I'll be just fine. But that's not ethical, right?
Well, I heard a couple of things in what you said. Thank you for sharing that. One is, I think like has been a theme, right? I mean, too often you come out and you're coming out to nothing. No housing, no employment, no support system, nothing, right? The second thing is that even if you're determined and you're doing your part to find a home for yourself, there's some systems obstacles in the way, one of which is the parole authority restricts where you can go, and if the places you can afford are in one of those restricted areas, then it's not an option for you, and then you cannot even get parole because you're denied that option of housing, and if you don't have a place to go, you cannot get paroled, right?
Mahalo, and thank you, Sharon and James. For me, I'm going to be advocating for the people that is like coming out from prison and they go to transition houses. We don't hardly have any housing here for the men and women. And there was a girl that came out of treatment and she didn't have a place to stay. She didn't work. She was going to treatment. And I believe when you're out of treatment for like a week and you're roaming around town, you get tempted, okay? But there's no help. So is it possible that, you know, we can get help to give the treatment, transition houses, if the person goes there and need help and they have a bed open, is it possible that they can fund their rent for them? Because majority of the time they're looking for money for the bed space. And I understand with the transition and the treatment center or sober support houses, they need the money. But also, this person needs help too. They need a bed space. So is it possible that the government can help them, fund that? Maybe give them an extra 6 months help until they get jobs. Thank you for that vision.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate you for sharing and being vulnerable. So looking out the room. Okay, executive leaders, did you guys hear the call out? Oh, there. A hand got raised. Okay, so this is before Andy, sorry, but before she talks, I want to just share. So the answer, in my eyes, the answer is yes. We just released a homeless and housing fund, funded by the county. And that's the whole purpose of this fund, is to fill those gaps, right? Because what you're talking about is maybe, I don't know, I'm not an expert, so I started looking around the room, right? There are rules for federal program funds, there are rules for state. But if there's a missing gap, I'm hoping that somebody, that's why I said, executive leaders, did you guys hear just a call out? Because there seems to be a need for support for those beds or rental assistance or whatever it is for those that otherwise don't qualify for anything else. Is that what I heard? Okay.
So I wanted to respond in just that is exactly what our struggle has been for the last 5 years, not having a place. And we have been lucky enough to receive one of these grants, and we just are in the process of opening, we just opened 2, and we're going to be opening 2 more recovery housing sober living homes. I hear what you're saying, because we are requiring a monthly payment as a give in. And I think it's one of those things for us to discuss about the option of people who don't have that funds when they first come in. And I think that's something that's totally doable. I don't think, we've never, for our organization, never turned anybody away for inability to pay. It's when you have the ability and you choose not to pay that we, end up having issues. So I would encourage, and I don't know if you're speaking to the Hilo side, but I would encourage anybody. I really feel like the people who are coming into these houses feel like there's so much opportunity, because the low barrier for people who are in recovery. This is specifically for people who are in recovery.
So I have a question to that. So my wife lives in a transitional home. Her rent is $580 a month. She makes about $600, $700 a paycheck. We pay rent for 2 separate places because they haven't allowed us to live together yet. So how are we to save money when we're having to dish it out all the time? Because you got to think about our food costs, because neither one of us qualify for food stamps. I make too much money, right? We're already paying rent for both places. I have to pay electric on top of. If it wasn't for my scholarship grants, I wouldn't have a right to school. So how do they save money if there's no outside help? Because she's already used up all her parole, only pays rent for 6 months, and they've extended it because they shut down every place we look for. So what do we do? This is all the things that, and this is just in a 1.5 years time that I've experienced all these things, And Corey told me, don't get discouraged. How do you not get discouraged? It makes no sense. I would choose to leave my house so that we only have one bill and we're able to save money, but then that'll put me out of place, right? So what do we do? Our credit is shut because I never established credit. Didn't realize it would be so important in my adult life. So I never established any credit. My credit score was 0 when I came out. I just established credit recently, and it was because my friend Zoe told me to get a prepaid credit card, and lo and behold, it works. Got a prepaid credit card, use it for gas, pay that little, and all the numbers started going up. To say, oh, it made such a big difference. That's how I was able to get my car. But these are all things that prior to being released, I didn't realize was going to be something. And the housing thing, that's a huge problem right now. The fact that they having my wife bounce around, we got to pay that bill. you're telling us to save money, but yet I gotta pay her rent and still be able to take care of myself as well. That's crazy.
I have a question, thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that, and here, we don't often get a lot of people in our program that are coming out of parole. There needs to be a parole program, and one of the questions, I was actually gonna ask a question, which is, a couple months ago, so I ran a local nonprofit from Breakout, and a couple months ago, I got a call from somebody in public safety saying, oh, will you please apply for our housing grant? There's our grant housing RFP. Nobody will apply. Why are people not applying? That's an issue when
For your
no, not for us. The state, there apparently there may have been nobody on our island who wanted to apply for this RFP for public safety. I told them my perspective why we've never applied, and a lot of it has to do with restriction, requirements so intense, and the limited amount of funding that you cannot hire enough staff to be able to do it. So from what I understand, there's nowhere for people to parole out.
Yeah, and paroling authority actually
Through
requires
paroling
the outer,
authority that isn't like a paid
outer island
entity.
girls are required to stay on
Yeah.
in Honolulu for 6 months at least. It's
So-
even if they want to, they can't.
So, I mean, there's places to parole out, but it's very limited, but there's not a funded one through public safety because, so that's a big concern. If no nonprofit or no agency wants to apply for an RFP, there's something wrong with that RFP. So, and this is.
Absolutely, and so I think we're getting to some of the root of the systemic issues. I don't know if folks heard all that, but essentially, the challenge is there isn't enough deeply, truly affordable housing available for folks coming out of the system, number one. And number two, even when there are resources available, the way it's contracted out by government entities, including the state, oftentimes discourages organizations from even applying for those funds because the administrative burden is so high or the amount is so low that you know it's not covering the true cost of providing services, so you can't even hire people to staff the program. So organizations say, you know what, it's not worth it for us to even apply for those funds. Did I get that right? Okay, and that's not unique to public safety, right? That's common across many state and county, thankfully not Hawaii County, but in other counties, I can tell you, City and County of Honolulu, that's a challenge too. There are funds available, but the contracting requirements and the restrictions on how much you can spend and what you can spend on are so onerous that people will just say it's not worth it. So that is part of the systemic change we have to push for, is for, number one, for contracts, government contracts especially, to cover the true cost of providing services, because too often it's not covering the true cost of providing services, right? And number two, then if we can get those resources to flow in that way, then all of us who are part of a service providing system or a housing system need to be ready to step up our game and make as many of those spaces available. But the first step is we got to advocate for that systems change. I mentioned the 5 priorities, and the 4th priority is to clear away all those obstacles from street to home. It's the same thing you're talking about. A lot of that is in the way those services are contracted. It's why there's so many hoops and obstacles, and a lot of times why the system is so under-resourced, actually. And so that kind of systemic change is not just in the justice system or in Department of Public Safety. It's in homeless services within Department of Human Services. It's within the healthcare system. And then we also got to break down all the silos that prevent those different streams of resources from actually working together in a seamless way for the folks that are trying to access it. Right?
So I have 2 questions for you, James. The first one is, you talked about the legislature. There was legislation passed for the state to support the work that you do. Could you give a little more detail about that? And then the other one is, how has the emergency proclamation on homelessness, how has it been used to further your goals?
So I don't know if everybody heard the question, but there was two-part question. One was, what resources did the legislature make available specifically? And two, okay. How are the resources going to be used? The legislature appropriated. And then the second question was about the emergency proclamation on homelessness and how is it making it possible to actually get projects or services created quickly. So on the first question, the legislature, for Kauhale specifically, the legislature, and before I go there, let me just say that the one thing that Sharon and I have in common is we do believe in trying to make these more flexible resources available to fill in the pukas in the system, to fill gaps, but also to demonstrate, I think, that if we make flexible funding available, then we can get better results without the need to have all these restrictions attached to it. So I think we're trying to make the funds available. We're also trying to document and demonstrate, like, there's a better way to do this. We can do it more flexibly. We can give providers that room to fill the gaps that they need and get better results. So the legislature appropriated $15 million this fiscal year for Kauhale, and that money can be used both for construction and for operation. Okay, so it could be used for reentry housing, group homes. There's a couple of criteria that are probably different than the criteria you're used to, because most of those criteria come from the justice system side of things, and I can talk about that in a second, but $15 million this year and $33 million next year for Kauhale, these village settings for housing and healing people. The legislature also made a small amount of money, it's just under $2 million, available for a permanent supportive housing pilot program that can be used to supplement rent and pay for supportive services for people in a project-based setting. In other words, in a group setting. It's not vouchers that are going to follow people to different units. That program is designed for a group setting, project-based, either a building or a home with multiple folks who are all benefiting from rental assistance and from supportive services that are paid for by this pilot program. So those are the two main new pots of resources the legislature made available. With the Kauhale, with both funds will start to become available next month in September. The Kauhale funds are the bigger source of funds, and it's been my main focus over the last couple of months since legislature ended. If you go to, I don't know if we can put the slides back up, but just Google homelessness state Hawaii, and my website will come up. There's a Kauhale tab there, and at the bottom of that page, there's a link to the draft criteria for selecting Kauhale projects. It's draft because we're inviting feedback on those criteria right now, but that ultimately is what's going to decide which projects float to the top and which don't. And I can tell you that there's a couple of key things, going back to what I shared earlier, that are going to be important for projects to rise to the top. One is we want that deep affordability, so $500 per household per month, in that range. Two is duration of stay. Projects that don't place an artificial time limit on when people need to transition out will get preference. Third is there has to be built into the plan a way to foster that sense of community and communal responsibility, and we're looking for creative proposals there. I know many of you do that in your programs already, so not asking you to invent something new, but if it is new to you, we'd be looking for a plan for how you're going to lift people up, how you're going to get people to start taking kuleana for things like the neighborhood watch, or for groundskeeping, or for taking care of the garden, and for forming a neighborhood council that is going to help to guide and govern manage the community, when the provider steps back over time. And that's also an explicit expectation of these funds, is that, I'm looking for proposals that combine 3 years of operation and, if needed, the construction or capital improvement costs also. But the reason for the 3 years is because the expectation is within 3 years, your goal as a provider or a support agency is to build the capacity of people in those 3 years and to start stepping back after 3 years. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those are some of the criteria. There's more on the website. You can look for it. And Next month, I'm going to try to do a couple of series of informational briefings before we actually put out the call for proposals. But that's where we're at right now. There's draft criteria published on the website.
Draft that you're talking about for the proposals for the Kahale, that's kind of like what, that's speaking to the wellness Kahale that Governor Green was talking about as far as supporting BISAC and doing in Kilo.
That's for all Kahale.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at.
Right. And then I forgot to answer the question about the proclamation, so just real quickly. The governor issued an emergency proclamation on homelessness back in January. This is different from the housing proclamation that was issued last month in July. The emergency proclamation on homelessness applies only to projects that are exclusively going to house or serve people experiencing homelessness. There's a set, this is also available on our website under proclamations. There's a proclamations tab there. There's a set of rules attached to that proclamation that define how projects can apply for coverage under that proclamation, and then the process that you'd go through to get approvals for your project once you're designated as eligible under the proclamation. Essentially, what the proclamation provides is expedited review of things like environmental review, historic preservation review, Department of Health review for things like water, clean water, wastewater. You get expedited. Within 2 weeks, you'll get a letter from those agencies saying either you're good to go or here's the things you need to mitigate on your site. But it's designed to speed up that process. And then each of the counties also has adopted their own method of, for homeless emergency proclamation projects, how to speed up the planning and permitting process at the county level for those homeless projects.
I had a question. What about Bishop Land or Queen Lydia Kalani? Because so much of the Native Hawaiians is, coming out and don't have the housing. Would they be willing to help out in that area?
It's a very good question. So far, the kind of private landowners that have stepped forward actually have been more either individual landowners or nonprofit organizations and faith-based organizations that have access to land, and they've come forward and said, "We want to do a kauhale." The large landowners, the elite trusts, not so far, but I do want to get them more engaged. The other places we're looking are state land and county lands. I will tell you that part of my learning curve has been to understand what the process is for getting state lands made available for kauhale. It's not as easy as I was hoping it was going to be. It involves a lot of interdepartmental agreements and transfer of responsibility and liability over the lands, which I'm trying to, that's an example of the kind of systems and bureaucracy that we need to push through to get these spaces created. And the last thing I'll say is the private land owners provide the advantage of, they so far have been much more willing, because I think they understand the community-based concept. They've been much more willing to say, yeah, let's have a kauhale here, versus this is something really new on the government side. And so to say, not only do we want to use government land to house people, but we want to do it in an unconventional way. We want to do it in a village way and really have, service providers there at the outset, but then stepping back over time. I mean, that's something that, makes some agencies go, whoa. And so it's taken more time to explain, to educate, and to get people bought into the idea that, okay, we're going to use public lands for this purpose.
Thank you. I have a question about if they were to go into this kauhale thing, James, and they're under the list with Hawaii Homes, is there any resources in the kauhale where they will help them get them on the list? And how long are they going to stay there? Is it a time limit? And how much is the rent?
So the rent, like I said, we're targeting $500 per household per month, or 30% of your income, like other public housing or affordable housing. The time limit, it'll depend on what kind of proposals come forward, but the proposals that have no time limit are going to be higher on the list, because really that's what we need, is the long-term space for folks, right? I mean, if we're just going to build transitional, where are you transitioning to afterwards, right? And so my goal, and that's why the priorities are written the way they are, is this is home for as long as you need it. For some people, they might be like, hey, I only need it for a couple months because I get family or I get a job lined up. There's other folks we know, right, that are not gonna magically double or triple their income in a couple years and be able to afford something in our marketplace. So that's why, to me, it's important to have that flexibility and to have that long-term ability to stay. And the third question on what kind of supports, not only DHHL, not only getting people signed up for the list, but what kind of other supports. I mean, that's the advantage of having a stable place for people to be, right? Like right now, to try to get people who are houseless, who are eligible for Hawaiian homes, to get documented and signed up, it's impossible, right? But there's plenty of people out there that are actually blood quantum eligible, but there's no way, if they're out on the street and getting swept from place to place, they're gonna be able to do that. So we can, having a kauhale or any stable place really, is gonna allow, what it allows for is for providers then to come in, right? And so we're seeing this, for example, like at the medical respite kauhale. Department of Human Services building is right next door. So now they send guys down every week to get people signed up right there for all their benefits, right? For SNAP, for GA, for disability. And it's been a huge thing for those guys, because they used to be on the street where they either got to go to a benefits processing center, or they have to have a phone where the number doesn't change every month where they can call in. So all that is to say, I think that's one advantage, not just of kauhale, but why the space is so needed, because that stability then allows us to connect people better. Yeah.
Do you guys or anybody in the room know either reentry housing programs, or house people that are coming back into society for housing? The reason I ask is because I get calls from either people that are still in wherever they are, or they're gonna be coming out, or they're out looking for housing, or whatever. I take all the information I can get.
On the Big Island?
Yeah, specifically the Big Island.
Inside prison, we don't have no resource for the Big Island, none. There's
going
no.
home. There's going home, boy.
Yeah, so
No
I
more
spoke
in
with
the prison,
somebody
they don't, that's what I
from
mean, like,
going
we don't have
home.
access to that information.
Like, no one tells.
Inside there,
But
yeah.
it wasn't even given to me as an option.
It's not known until we walk out of the doors. Oh, going home is an option on the Big Island, but we've already been seen, they've already been seen through a board. There is no option for them to come here.
I'm gonna share.
They're not taking police right
I did talk to going home, so we're kind of looking for the same thing. If there's a phone book, I know I'm in the housing program, Breakout, but of course, yeah, all the resources are
now.
better.
And we talk after.
Sure.
But literally, there's 2 resources inside prison that we would have access, or the girls have access to. You know, a house and the windows. That is your only 2 options.
That's only for about maybe 10 women.
I guess there's a long one.
Yeah. So I got paroled in June, but I wasn't released till October, because that's when the bed space was open. Even though I was already paroled, I just sat and waited for there to be space for me there. So that's really common. And that goes for all the outer island girls. There's no resource for them to go back to wherever they came from, available to them inside. Most of the time they'll find out about them once they're out, and then they gotta go through this whole thing where they gotta talk to the PO, and it's just
Yeah, to be able to move once you're already parole out too. For me, this is always my home. I ended up on a walk because that was the only option for me. And then now if I want to move home now, oh my gosh, if I can even get the yes, then it's just mountains of paperwork and a waiting list and, and then I have to have housing already set up here. I already have to have a place to go where I know that I can pay rent, I know that I have a job, and it's like, how do you do that? I'm on a walk. So it's like, how do I set up a job and a place to live on this island I haven't been home to in 9 years? It's just, this is my first time back in 9 years. It's really, it's a couple hours, I miss it.
I was just curious if you guys had any information or you were aware about the country club hotel on Bailey Drive, Gila. It's a state-owned hotel that they just awarded to a developer. It's 152 rooms, they're evicting everyone. If there's any plans by the state to help these people get new housing?
Country Club Hotel.
What was it, 121 Dragon?
Yeah, so what's the question? I'm sorry.
It's a state-owned hotel, but it was awarded to a developer living at White Rooms now. It's 152 rooms. They're all like long-term hotel rooms, low income. They were being evicted to this hotel to do this new renovation. Is there any plans by the state to try to help relocate these people?
I actually don't.
Sorry.
I'm not familiar with that property at all. Do you know which one?
Yeah, I'm familiar, but I don't have the details. So I would be amiss to just, I don't even want to take a stab at it. Yeah. Yep.
Nowhere to go. They're looking all over. They can't find anything else.
And it's called the Country Club Hotel.
That's right.
Yeah.
Is that the one right by Reed's Bay?
Next to Nani Law.
Right by Reed's Bay, yeah.
Not Uncle Billy's.
No.
Other side.
Some of the people forced out of the hotel, they go over to a SWAT because they couldn't find housing anywhere. But they were arrested and now it's been pissed off.
Well, I can just speak for our organization, Neighborhood Base of Puna. We have actually assisted families in securing housing. Once they received their eviction notice, they reached out to us, and we were able to help a few families secure housing elsewhere. So that's the main.
They're very concerned. They're just simply on the street. And if it's privately, they needed to go to town, they changed the lots on them. Some people left, so while they're gone, the landlord fled them up the apartment. Above them, like on pipes, fled their apartment to make it leave. Because he doesn't know wait to start the development.
Let's connect afterwards. I'll give you my contact information. The best I can do is to advocate internally. So, yeah, I don't have authority over other departments, unfortunately, so it's all through relationships, communication, advocacy. So if I find out what state department is responsible for that, then I can advocate from my office's position. That's something different. There was one more question right in front of you, and I think we're about out of time.
Hi, Sharon. Thanks, James, for sharing. My question is, with the Housing Production Fund and those projects that would be awarded, what is the process with the DPW and Building Department to expedite those projects once approved?
No. The housing
So
production.
you're talking about the relations to the issuance of the emergency proclamation on housing? And
No, the Housing Production Fund. So those projects who eventually get approved through the Housing Production Fund, what plan does DPW have to expedite the building permit process?
okay, so I'm not, while the housing production fund comes out of my office, it's not under my responsibility. But I certainly can take that back to the office. I know that they're in the process of the reviewing process, so it's kind of technical right now, but I'll certainly bring that concern and I'll get back to you. So I see people walking in, and then 2 minutes ago I got told, well, 12 minutes ago I got told we had 10 minutes. But I am here. I'm sitting on this side of the room. If you want to reach out, please do so. He's also here. I volunteered him again. But thank you for spending this time with us. Appreciate it.